Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Module 9, Selling It. This is HRM 551. And tonight we have our guest speaker, Derek Chappelle, who is the Enterprise Account Executive at Full Story. And our topic and agenda tonight is welcoming Derek back, of course. He was with
Thank you.
us
It's good to be
in
back.
module 4, and so as this is module 9, this is about selling it and really how to sell your business case. So what we'll be going over tonight is really some finer points on what works, what doesn't work during the interview, and then if we have time, you can ask questions. And so I just wanted to remind everybody about like the final stages of the business case for selling it that we talked about is really keeping in mind that the project objectives at this point are the right ones that you've selected. And they fit that wider strategy that we discussed in module 4 with Derek, right? About strategy, making sure it's all in aligned, and that the option that you chose out of all of your options is the best choice, right? Because we're up to that final stage, and that the preferred option is going to work. And that at this point in the game, their concerns have been met. There being the concerns of any of the stakeholders who you've identified and making sure that their concerns are good to go, and that the team has done a professional job that can be trusted in both preparing for the data, looking at it, and that what could to move forward. So with all of those reminders, honestly, when it comes down to the presentation, there's other tips and tricks and things that, Derek, I hope that you can point out to the group and let them know about, how the fine art of selling ideas. As for those who don't remember, if Derek, you want to just do a quick review of your background in
Of course.
sales, that'd be perfect.
Yes. So I've been in technology sales for the past 10 years, ranging from human resources information systems to all the way to what I currently sell as a digital experience intelligence platform at Full Story. Have done quite a lot of business cases, a lot of discovery analysis, and learning the right ways and the wrong ways on how to package that and communicate it and who to communicate it to. So happy to kind of walk through all that fun stuff during today's discussion.
Great. So why don't we start out with, whoops, I don't know why that just went blank, but that's okay. We can just do the the full faces here. So why don't we talk really about some of the first tips about the actual presentation itself,
Yeah.
and some guidelines about that and how that all works.
Yeah. So when you're doing an executive, I personally call it executive read back business case. You're having to tell a concise story about what your recommendation matches the needs of the organization, but also why it's better than all the alternatives, right? Because if you just bring something good, your executive group's going to look at you like, okay, well, what else have you looked at? And what are the competitive advantages to the solution or to the strategy that you've chosen to address these business issues? The other piece of it, it's not part of the presentation, is doing the work beforehand. And there's a lot of work that goes into this. Largely what I've found is a collaborative mutual action plan that has guided this entire process is ultimately what's going to make sure that your business case, your executive readback is tight, but also the right folks are in the room. Because no matter how good your presentation is, if you don't have the executive stakeholders that ultimately are going to make the decision, it's not going to go anywhere. So, just from a fundamental level, that's kind of some of the key factors that or boxes you need to check before you even get into the room.
Okay, great. That's helpful. And I would say, the group has learned in last week's module about, how to select the right ones, right? To be
Yeah.
in that room, but also to get some of that buy-in. How important would you say it is to um, make sure, last week I had the keep your friends close, but your enemies closer, right? And I'm a big believer in having the naysayers in the room when you're planning stuff. So if you
Yeah.
could talk a little bit about that, because I spoke a little bit about that, um, and want to really make sure that folks understand about using some of that information in a positive way.
Yeah, Stephen, that's probably one of the things that a lot of people, no matter what their profession, learn the hard way a number of times before realizing that you have to bring your detractors, the naysayers, whatever kind of lingo you want to use to describe them, into the fold, because that is ultimately allows you to um, one, pull out what their objections are and build those into the challenges and the criteria that your business case is built around. Now, if you don't do that and they come into the executive readback, the business case presentation, they're going to bring those up. And if you don't have answers prepared, if you haven't proof sourced, that not only this is the best choice, but it's going to work and it's going to also meet whatever their concerns are, you're going to go 2 steps back, and then you're going to have to do a lot of repeat work in order to get executive buy-in for whatever it is, initiative, strategy, technology that you're trying to get buy-in for. That's a good point.
Yeah, and so what would you say? And maybe enemies is a little strong of a word, but
No, listen, Stephen, you know how it is.
yes, I do. It's kind of why I said it. I actually don't regret saying that. Sometimes, but it's the idea of making sure those that are the naysayers, or those that have been really voicing, strong opinions about why it won't work or what's wrong with it, right? Is to come
or
up
there's
with
a risk.
Yeah, or there's a risk, right? And how that risk, or there's a risk that doesn't look like it has many options, right? And so those are some of the things that you want to just make sure that you've fundamentally looked at.
And Stephen, I will say, just in the realm of, especially in the digital realm, especially if you're capturing customer information. I mean, this is a battle that, my team has to fight every single day, because you have data regulations out there that are very strict and come with a lot of consequences unless things are handled correctly. And if folks aren't brought into the fold and you don't go through the proper avenues to educate them, let them know that you've documented their concerns, addressed each one, and proof sourced it. You're not getting any closer to getting what you're trying to accomplish done. You could have all your fans on the other side of the room, but if there's a key stakeholder, they could be, cheering for you, waving your flag, saying, "Hey, we're ready to go." But if there's somebody, especially on the decision-making team, that has big risk factors that they can communicate well to the business, that's going to be a big problem.
And also to sort of, maybe poison is a strong word to use, but it kind of gives a good picture in my mind, of that even they may not be the stakeholder, but they may be close to a stakeholder, right? And then so that they are sort of the advisor to that stakeholder who says, well, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and this is wrong. And that's why this won't work. And you need to shoot down the idea. Right.
Yep. And to your point on that first slide you shared, Stephen, it's not only that, the preferred option is the best choice for the, the performance metrics and everything. You also have to prove it's the best choice for some of these risk factors that are involved with whatever decision
Yeah.
you're trying to make. So you really have to make a business case, and a lot of business cases do include risk mitigation as part of. And Stephen, you probably have seen that a number of times. Risk mitigation is a big factor, especially in the HR world, and that executives will make that a line item. They will put that number in their head just as strong as some of the projected, you know, some of the projected like maybe financial savings per se.
Yeah, and I think it's key because even I would say I've recently had proposed an idea that was related to some financial benefits, right,
Mhm.
for the college. And yeah, there was a naysayer unexpectedly who said, "Oh, but I don't like X."
Mhm.
Had nothing to do with what actually was being proposed, but it
Yep.
was sort of a tangent of, and therefore it tainted the idea of the overall, and it was taking from this, here's a win for us if we go with this. But the person's like, but I don't like X, and it was like, but it's Y, right? And
Yeah.
because easy enough that we're now back to the drawing board to prove why X is still a value, even though they were talking about Y. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of having that, and sometimes you can't be prepared enough.
It
um,
takes a lot. I mean, Stephen, you probably know better than anybody. Um, it takes a lot to really make sure that you cover all of your bases before you get into the room. Um, and actually, I did bring along a example for later in the chat after we get through
okay,
some of the questions that I can walk you through and kind of like how we check each of these boxes off.
okay, great. And that kind of brings me maybe to segue to the next part, the actual um, either day of the presentation, and really just being prepared for that. In this day of um, hybrid world, that there's sometimes hybrid where you may have people in the room and then people online. Any tips for that? Because that's a new nuance thing, right? No more of the sometimes companies don't want the physical people in their office that are not their own, right? Or
Yeah.
even nobody else is in the office, and so now you're forced to kind of make your pitch hybrid. How is that different from the in person?
You have to be concise. You have to be able to walk in, quickly express, um, walk through your introductions, the niceties, um, immediately kind of go into what have we heard? What have we heard? Why are we having this conversation? What are the challenges that you've been talking about, and what are the outcomes that you know that you desire really? Um, then get into talking about how why is this solution a match, and not only why is it a match, but why is it the best thing that the best option that you can take. Now, we all know on this call, nobody takes anybody's word for just their word, right? So not only are you going to have to do that, but then you're going to have to essentially prove one way or the other. And Stephen, believe this is part of your list. Prove that it's going to work, and that indeed, the claims you're making about why it is better do in fact will in fact come to fruition. So this could be along the lines of, a trial. It could be a proof of concept, or we call it a proof of value. Um, and of course, this comes before, and there's a lot of work around this, and this is part of like everything that leads up. But you should have already done all that work. You should have had a preliminary discussion with your stakeholders and your champions that you've been working closely with, and validated that, hey, this is exactly going to be this is going to check the box of my executive team. Even if you can get an early introduction to the executive team and check some of these boxes, the more the better. But essentially, when you're delivering your business case, this needs to be really, really tight. And you'll actually walk through and say, hey, here's example A, where we tested what we said from solving this challenge. Here's what we found, and here's exactly the reason why we do it better. And you'll have a number of those, but that is where people, if you keep the first half tight and you show, hey, I understand your business, and then you have real life examples or things that really do show that your product work, your audience is going to become so engaged that it's not going to be a presentation anymore. They're going to be asking questions like, hey, talking around the room, and you're going to get folks super engaged even though you're not there. Now, if you did not do all this homework, the day of the water cooler talk is kind of long gone in a sense, right? There's not going to be so much leeway to chit chat or build, capital with the stakeholders because you're not there. So it's all the more reason to execute really well ahead of time, have a very clear presentation that, again, walks through why we do it better, proof sources that, and then also jump right in. Okay, we've shown that. Here's what we've now worked on to project the return on investment to your organization for this project. And at that point, again, they're going to be very engaged because you understand their business. You've proven that you can help them. All right, now, yes, let's talk about the numbers.
So a lot of students have asked, like, how many slides should I have? And I always say that's hard to give a concise answer on that because it depends on the material. But can you give sort of a guideline of, like, should it be 40 slides, 5 slides, 3 slides and say ta-da, or 15? What's the magic number, or how do they judge what's enough and what's concise enough?
So that's a tough question, Stephen, especially when you have technical validation or proof of concept or proof of value examples, because that could be 10 slides in itself. Now, those are a high quality 10 slides. It's about them. It's real. It's impactful. They are going to fly through it and they're going to be super high engaged. Now, I feel like where folks sometimes get lost is where they just talk too much about the solution, right? Where there's just slide after slide of here's how we capture this, and this is what we do, and here's what it means to you, but there's really nothing that pertains to their world. Those slides are where you're gonna lose folks, and they're gonna feel like you didn't listen to them. But if you can keep that concise, and then also the rest of the slides all pertain to them, it's okay. As long as they're impactful, they're included in the agenda, they've been agreed upon, that's great. It's just you don't want to talk, or you don't want to include too many slides that don't actually proof source with their data or speak their language, and it talks too much about your own product strategy. That's where you want to mitigate. You want to keep that concise and then let all your homework speak for itself.
Okay, great. That's helpful. At least from my point of view, that's helpful.
Yeah. And I'll actually show. I have a great example for you, Stephen.
Okay, great.
Because, and if you want me to bring.
I was going to say, is this the right time now? Do you want to?
Okay. Yeah, let's bring it up.
I will give you permission to share if I can. There we go.
All right. Looks like I have this. Let's see here. There we go. And Stephen, just let me know if you can see this clearly.
Okay, it's starting.
Is it large enough?
It is.
Okay, cool. All right, so here's an example. I've tried to pull any customer logos out of this just because I wanted to give you guys an example. And to Stephen's point, it's like, how long should this be? I'm going to go ahead and call it out. This is 30 slides, and this got done with flying colors. But I'm going to walk you through and kind of cover One, what each of these slides does, why I included it, and why it's important. So the agenda. This is just as important as having the right folks in the room, especially when you're dealing with high level executives. They need to know how they're going to spend their time, and you can see I outlined exactly how much time we are going to spend, and have them agree, is this in line with your expectations? Because once you get their permission or their approval that this is in line with their expectations, you now have control over the entire meeting, because we have agreed how we're going to spend our time. But Stephen, when I look at this agenda, I see your 5 categories that we started this as far as what you had in your presentation. That, understanding the objectives, how they relate to the wider strategy. Why is not only this a good choice, but why is it the best choice? Proving that it's going to work, ensuring that all their concerns have been met from both a business standpoint as well as a return on investment standpoint. And then also you're going to see at the end, prove that you're going to do a professional job and can be trusted by your action plan moving out of this meeting. All right, so, as far as understand the wider objectives, you can see here, just calling it out. We're in the room because you guys have a problem. And then we get into what we heard. Okay, here is, the background of your business. Here are the challenges that we're trying to solve. This is what we understand, the outcomes that you're hoping to yield from this project. And then here are the required capabilities. Now, Stephen, this required capabilities is probably one of the most critical pieces of the puzzle here, because this is where you're saying, hey, this is why we do it. This is why we can meet your needs, but this is why we can best meet your needs. And you'll see that there's a number of things here that one will plug both between the challenges and the positive business outcomes, but even back, relating back to our risk profile or our risk situation that has entered the required capabilities. How are you going to help us with this? Because we uncovered this from an information security team that they were specifically worried about CCPA data regulations, right? So now the power these 2 slides are going to give you is that now you have the ability, you probably have already validated this, but you just don't ever know what's going on in some of these higher level executives' heads. And your champions and the business stakeholders that you might be working with might not know that either. So having this laid out in this format in 4 simple categories, you can, at this point, ask for their feedback. Does this look right? What are we missing? What do we need to change? Because Stephen, now you have the ability to pivot if needed, and you're not going to get caught blind, right? Because if somebody then brings up something last minute, well, James, what, we had kind of opened the floor to anything else that we wanted to talk today about. Can we talk about this offline? That way, your presentation doesn't get hijacked, goes sideways, you lose 15 minutes, and then you're not able to finish in line with the agenda. So now that we've shown that we understand the objectives, where the solution fits, now we can get into, all right, let's talk about why, get into a little bit of detail, how it works, why it's going to work the best as it pertains to the required capabilities. And you'll see I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 slides to this. Now, Stephen, there's 8 slides, but it takes me about 7 minutes to get through this, if not 5.
So less than a minute a slide.
Yeah. So it's and this is actually the short version I have and it's particularly to the solution that we offer. But even if this was 15 slides, I would get through it in 7 minutes. The cadence and the transfer of knowledge and communication is really what drives it, just as much as how many slides you're using. You can have 15 slides, but if it's a valid point for every slide and you're spending 30 seconds on that slide, that room is going to be engaged. Now, if these slides look a little bit airy, you're walking through, you're reading to folks one by one, it's going to be painful. It's not going to land.
Which is always a pointer. I think that's a valid point to make about Not reading the slide, but the slide should be an overall, and you should be able to discuss the slide because everybody can read the slide.
Everybody can read the slide.
Unless they're visually impaired. Then
Yeah.
you may have to read the slide to them, right? But other than that, the slide's there, but not for you to read off of. The slide's there
Yes.
for you to go through points about it, right? So you're not sitting there saying DXI provides end users with, you're
Yeah.
probably talking about, DXI and then just flowing through those so that they
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah. And ultimately, you'll see this last slide that is about the solution, but it provides a avenue to what's coming next. Hey, here's what you can expect to see from our proof of value, which is where one or now point 3 to the slide that we started with, Stephen, this is going to work. Now, when you're telling folks that you tested this and you have examples, you need to be very clear about the background and the story behind what you did. Because if you do not do that, the folks in the room are going to question how much data was captured. How long did we do this? Why didn't we target this team? All right. So as long as you're clear and upfront about what you did and why you did it, which is, you can see here exactly what we outlined, that won't happen. But if you don't, again, is you have to do your homework. You have to do your prep work, because if you're not crystal clear about every step of this story, then people are going to bring it up or they're going to question it. But we've said, hey, here's exactly what we did. And you see this is hyperlinked, but even there was a number of technical criteria or concerns that are outlined in this mutual action document that can be clicked into on the fly if needed to discuss. So here's the fun part. This is where, if you did do your homework, this is where you get to shine. And this should be validated by your stakeholders, and not only proof source that it's going to work, but also proof source all those required capabilities that made you the best option to solve these business challenges. And you'll see, there's 3 categories we built here, but the power of these is every single one of these example slides, Stephen, you can actually click in and we can go right into the platform to highlight each of these live. So one, having the slide, but being able to be prepared to actually jump in live and highlight and show folks how you did this is extremely important, because if this is the first time people are seeing and they haven't been involved, they might ask you. And if you're not prepared to do it, you're going to lose 10 minutes. And then ultimately, this is one thing I should have brought up in the first part. When you go into this meeting, you have to know what you want your outcome to be. Is that a mutual action plan with the CTO or the CHRO that talks about, the paper process, outstanding red lines, whatnot? So if you lose a big gap of time, you saw how tight the agenda was up front. You're not going to get to that. And that can really derail the success that you have, no matter how well you presented. And it could just be a little gap like that. You have to take the time to actually go through and highlight something like that. Sure. I'll take a quick pause. Any questions on that thus far?
You can put them in the chat if you don't want to talk.
That's also fine.
Okay, I'm taking it.
All right.
They're good to go.
All right. So how we make it happen. Sometimes these next steps can be very extensive, which you'll see I hyperlink, and I will go to a mutual action plan document that, one, you should already know what these next steps should be. And that should come from your champions, the people that you've been working with. What does the financial approval look like? What does legal approval look like? What does business approval look like? So this should be prepped and ready to go. That way, when you bring it up during the conversation, one, it's quick, but two, it's a matter of filling dates, timeline, or dates, timeline, same thing, roles, responsibilities, and timeline. Now, also, you want to make sure you are showing your audience the path forward, and how, as a professional, they can trust you to guide them on the rest of this journey. So you need to have some sort of visualization slide that outlines, hey, what happens? All right, yes, there's some stuff to formalize this relationship, but what happens after we do formalize that relationship?
Yeah.
So talk about how this gets started. Talk about who they're going to be working with. Talk about what does the timeline look like? What type of resources are going to be needed on their end? And then also, you'll see I saved this for last, but also be ready to talk about the actual impact from a ROI standpoint to the organization. And this isn't something you can see. I save it for last because ultimately we're going to talk about this, whether it's in this meeting or not. But
Yep.
You want to have the projections as far as ultimately like what the impact to the organization is going to be, especially relative to the cost. Because if we don't have that prepared, it's going to look like, again, we haven't done our homework. We might not understand what we're bringing to the business as it relates to what we're asking for in return, which is an investment or a purchase.
And funny you should show that screen, because it's very similar to what we've been covering this semester as far as kind of costing out the options, right? And looking at what ones are the best, what ones are not, and doing sort of like a several year iteration of the overall, whether it's cost or savings, the expenses for implementation and things like that.
Yeah. So I hope that was helpful, Stephen.
Yeah, that was great. I really appreciate that. Thank you. That was,
of course,
that's actually really, really helpful, because it really outlines all of the different succinct things that you don't think about when you're seeing it, because when you're engaged and you're engaged in the material, but you don't realize the science behind getting people engaged and getting them into reviewing and showing them. So I think that's super helpful.
Yeah, whenever you get in a position where you're doing this, it's almost like a little mini project management role in a sense, because there's so many different pieces. There's so many back-looking pieces. There's so many forward-looking pieces. So the best thing that you can do is just have done your homework, have every angle ready to be able to be addressed. And that is what ultimately is going to make you successful and ready for anything that room throws at you.
Yeah.
So I do have a question now. This is Kimberly. Hey, now that you're done with your presentation, if you don't mind. So you had about an hour for your presentation. So let's say you are only given limited time. So I'm not going to go, obviously we're in school, so we have like 5 minutes to do it. So you're not going to be given 5 minutes, but if you were given maybe a half an hour, like what are the, what you have to have this.
my honest answer, I wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say no.
Right.
Kimberly, that would be a major red flag. Mm-hmm. If we're asking for a 6-7 figure investment and somebody says they're only going to give you 30 minutes to deliver your executive readback, they're not spending 6 or 7 figures. It's that would be a major red flag, and where I would almost take a step back and say, hey, lean on your stakeholders and say, what's going on here? We spent the past 5-6 months with the expectation that this would be a level of investment, that this would be the approver. They were bought into the process. And Kimberly, this is also that mutual action plan I was talking about. The expectation for this call should have been set at the beginning before we even did anything.
Gotcha.
Now, people get in trouble when they do not set that mutual action plan up in advance and don't set the expectation. Hey, of course, we'll do a proof of value. We'll spend 80 hours of our time putting this beautiful presentation and data and results together. And oh yeah, I hope you meet with me at the end. Like, no, that's a hard lesson that a lot of folks learn a couple times before they actually start planning ahead. But I will tell you, once we have the initial conversation to assess what it is we're trying to do together, what the process should look like, that's when we say, okay, if we're looking to engage, here's the proof of value process. These are our typical steps. Here's the requirements that here's what we're going to ask of you. We're going to ask for 3 discovery sessions with this team, an executive feedback, a ROI analysis meeting, and then ultimately 1 hour with X, Y, and Z executive stakeholder to present our results. Are we all on board with that? Wonderful. If not, best of luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would almost think it requires a rethink, right, on the project, or like you said, another conversation with the stakeholders to say, are you in or are you not? And being point, in, not to being proposed and married to the idea, but being open enough to wanting to listen to the proposal, correct?
Yeah. And that's the thing. If you had, Kimberly, if you had that conversation up front and, the stakeholders that you're working with committed to this, you can have that tough conversation. Guys, this is what we talked about 5 months ago. What's happening? Well, X, Y, and Z happened, but now you can hold, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but you're in a position to hold them accountable to help you find a solution. Now, if you didn't do that up front, they could say, sorry, out of luck, and you could complain. You're not going to have as much ground to stand on, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great question, Kimberly.
That was a fantastic question.
Yeah. So I think other things, as when the presentation ends, it doesn't really end, right?
No.
And so I think that's sometimes I got through the presentation, but that's sort of, you're on to the next stage. So what would that next stage look like?
Well, in that kind of path forward slide that I had, really, you should know what those next steps are. And that has to do with working with with your champions, your stakeholders. When you go into that meeting, before you go into that meeting, you should be having a preliminary call or 2 that says, hey, what happens after this? What does the process look like? All right, let's say we get the green light. What happens then? Okay, we have to then get CFO approval. All right, then we have to meet with information security to get their final sign off. Then we have to call a reference. You want to have all that lined out, and as you're going through this, and as you do a few of them, what's weird is you're going to be laser focused. Going through the presentation is nothing. You are going to be laser focused on getting to the end of that presentation and getting your outcomes, which is getting sponsorship to get each one of those scheduled with the right person in the right role with the right responsibilities at the right timeline.
Makes sense. So when you're thinking about the overall sell of the business case, and you've gotten through to the plan, what are some of the post-selling activity that still needs to occur, right? Is there other, and I'm not talking about like, you've got your iterations and going through the business case, but sometimes stuff goes bump in the night, right?
Yeah.
And you may have to kind of come back to your stakeholders with, some different actions.
Yeah, there's a couple angles on this. One, I'm going to talk about the rough stuff. That could be where there's a money or a legal or some sort of risk problem that
like an unexpected pandemic that pops up.
Yes, exactly. That's a wonderful example, right? And that's where you have to lean on the folks that you've been working with to navigate those. And that's tough. The stuff that you didn't see coming, I will tell you, a perfect example. I'm working on something right now, and their legal team asked for 50x indemnification of the contract value. And I just know how my legal team's going to feel about that. It makes my gut sink. But at the end of the day, you use your internal capital to work with the folks on your side, explain what's going on, explain where their head's at, and then use the champions on the other side to essentially do the same and bring the resources together that you need to get the job done. Doing things, trying to solve these complex issues over email is usually a bad idea. If a big hurdle comes up, get the right people together on the phone over a Zoom call as soon as possible. That way, again, you are properly understanding what the objection is, because a lot gets lost in translation, especially let's say a certain stakeholder wasn't able to join the presentation, still doesn't fully understand why you do something the best. You need to get in front of those folks as soon as possible. Now, on the other hand, after the presentation, there is a excellent opportunity to build trust to become a trusted advisor, be seen as a professional resource for the path forward. And this also can be utilized to help get something done. For instance, if you are working with the goal of supporting a project that starts in, we'll say, 6 weeks. Well, we'll say Kimberly is on the other side of the fence, my champion, right? Kimberly, hey, we have 6 weeks to your project starts. I'm already going to have to ask for a couple favors to get an onboarding and professional service team assigned in that matter of time to get you up and running. Here's what this path forward looks like. And that setup timeline, similar to all that you hear me talk about mutual action plans all the time, they are the key to success. Building, again, yet another collaborative mutual action plan that backs into that date, shows them every single thing that's going to happen, is not only going to make them feel secure, trust you, know that you're the right person to go on this endeavor with. It is going to drive the urgency to get your initiative approved more quickly than if you do not take the time to guide that person on what's going to happen next.
Makes sense.
Cool.
If we think just to overall, because we're almost up on time, but if we think overall about the things not to do, as far as the presentation and the stakeholder discussions and dialogues, and then throughout that presentation, right? Because that's what they're all working on this week and next week, to finally present the ultimate presentation to make the stake for their business case. What shouldn't they be doing?
Don't use slides, and this goes back to not any extra exercise. Don't use slides that don't provide some sort of value as it pertains to those 5 categories Stephen outlined in the first part. Noise doesn't help. And if it's not telling folks, hey, we understand your problems, we are not only a good fit, we're the best fit, proving that it is work, and we have done our work, done our homework to show that, addressing any concerns that there could be from either a return on investment, a business risk standpoint, and show them that you are a trusted professional that is going to guide them through the rest of this process, it really doesn't need to be talked about. Let's see, what else?
Graphics.
Never go graphics. Yeah, that's As far as what do you think of there, Stephen?
Too much or
Yeah,
cartoonish?
yeah, yeah. You want it to be straight to the point. Um, you don't want fluff, and there's no need for fluff. The fact is, I found that folks try to use fluff when they haven't done the preliminary work to make an effective presentation and cover those 5 categories. And they try to make it, well, fun and engaging with it. That doesn't work. You might as well have leave it plain Jane and have all the meaningful content that checks the boxes on those 5 categories versus worrying about if it looks pretty.
Okay.
Let's see what else. Don't ever go into one of these presentations without running through it with the stakeholders you've been working with and getting their approval and seeing if anything is missing. Because that's just one, it's so easy to do. And I promise they're going to have some sort of guidance that's going to make your life easier. Yes, it's an extra step. It's an extra meeting, but it is a priceless meeting.
So
And
pre-meeting with the stakeholders before you present to the decision makers.
Exactly, or the decision makers. There's a lot of content here. And I will tell you, especially as it relates to, the first box, understanding the objectives and the overall strategy. You've talked about that so much, that's not going to change, right? You talked about that so many times at this point. But something as simple as where you're proof sourcing your proof of concept, your trial, whatever, your technical validation, whatever you want to call it, things like that, they are going to be able to give you guidance to say, okay, this one, I know Jane, our CTO, is going to really care about this. Is there anything else that you have like this? Meanwhile, this other piece, not really meaningful. That's not really an object. We're getting rid of that piece of the site anyway, or that's going to be something that we're rolling out, sunsetting. Because what's really embarrassing when you get on and you show something, hey, look, we found, like, oh, we're getting rid of that next week. It's not. It's trust me. It's not. That's not fun. So never go into one of these without having the opportunity to validate that all the content is as good as it can be. Because it's like getting. I mean, if you think about it, it's like getting the test beforehand almost, or getting a bunch of answers to the test. And I know that, not that anybody would ever do that, Stephen.
No, of course not.
But it's a free pass. You got to take it.
Yeah. And rehearsing before you present.
Oh yeah. Always.
And I think there's a fine line between rehearsing and having a sort of a script. And I use that term very loosely because you don't want to look like you're reading off of something, right? How it should, if you want to just, it should be natural, if you will.
It should be natural, and everybody on your team should know their roles and responsibilities on the call before you get, because if not, it is going to be chaos. And to your point, Stephen, you don't have to get the pitch perfect narrative ahead of time. Like, the thing is, this should be conversational. You should know their business well enough, and you should know this content well enough that you're really walking them through it. Like, you're just being their guide. But what doesn't work, to your point, is sitting there and using presenter mode and just reading, because that's really not going to land too well.
Yep. Nope. I completely agree. It definitely is. It is something where you wouldn't want to do that. Yeah, you want it to be a natural free flow. You want it to be something that comes off as knowledgeable, because I think when you're reading stuff, it comes off as
you're reading.
Yeah, you're reading it and you don't know. You're just reading the board and you're, surprised by words on the screen or.
but see, I'll tell you the best part is, and it goes back to the 5 categories that you put up. If you've done a really good job on number 1, you know their objectives and how they fit in the wider strategy and each of the stakeholders' roles and how they relate to that. If you truly understand that, you can walk through this no problem. Now, if you haven't done that homework and you really haven't checked box 1 of those 5 categories that you outlined, Stephen, that's where you feel like you have to read, because otherwise you're making it up because you really don't know that,
Yep.
that team on the other side of the fence.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And then yes. And then just kind of not being able to demonstrate that that option is going to work. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's where, yeah, most definitely. All right, so we have approached the hour. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I really appreciate it. And so this has been really helpful, I think, to those who will be watching as a later recording, and providing them with some tips and tricks as they finish up their selling the business case. So thank you for that. Really appreciate your time on that.
Of course. Thank you for inviting me, Stephen. This was fun.